Hey, a couple days ago I launched my first software as a service, and the principle is extremely easy. You basically get a bunch of slides and then you can create beautiful code animations between those slides. And y'all really seem to enjoy it. This is the entire reason I started the channel 1.5 years ago, launching your first SaaS. What happens when you get a couple thousand users in like 1 day or 2 days? How did the database handle it? How did the server handle it? We're gonna take a look at the metrics, the cost, and everything that's interesting about launching your first software product. And I say we start at the very beginning. This is the landing page, and it's also simultaneously the only page you can go to in this entire application. It's pretty simple, you know. I built this in 2 weeks. And okay, so here's the deal. This is how it works architecturally. If we click on the export button, that's gonna make a request to our export endpoint. And then really interesting, there's a polling approach behind this to know when the export is done from the server. First off, this is the interesting part. This is the export request. We can kind of take a look at the data. Great, it downloaded our file. We don't really care about that right now. And we can see the initial request gets back a status of processing and a random ID that we generate. How is this done architecturally? Essentially, we use Next.js both for the front end and also the backend functionality of Next.js. That means when we make a request to export, this initial request is actually sent, we can see that right here, to an endpoint that is hosted on the same domain. That means to a Next.js endpoint. And included in that request from the front end to the Next.js backend, because there's a second backend, you're gonna see that, is the slide content. This slide content is then put into our database on the Next.js backend. In practice, it looks like this. We can go through the slides right here. Some of them are empty because since I opened this page, the time to live has expired. All of them are automatically deleted after some interval. But on the right side, you can see what this looks like. The slide 0 and then the text content in base64 encodation of that slide 0, the first slide, and so on. By the way, if you're not familiar with what this even does, basically we have multiple slides and we can animate beautifully between those slides. And for each slide, we also need to know the content that is shown on that slide to make the export work. And that is stored right here in this format in our database. So the answer from the backend also contains the ID that we can then keep polling with to see if the export is done. The actual export is not handled in Next.js, mainly because of the time it takes to process videos, and also because at first I wanted to write this whole backend in Go, and you have to keep them separate. And eventually I would like to move to Go, but currently it is written in TypeScript. The backend from Next.js sends a request to a completely separate backend that is hosted in a separate instance on Railway. And this is just a basic Express server. And let's take a look at some of the metrics on this server. So if I go to 7 days, you can clearly see when the launch happened. When I published the video about this project, there was some kind of traffic before this from Twitter, and then I made the video right here with a giant peak. However, one thing I really didn't expect is at the peak, this only took 1.7 virtual CPU units. And that's really surprising because this instance I upgraded to a paid instance beforehand actually has 32 virtual CPU units, and it didn't need anywhere close to that. Now that's not completely accurate because when you go in closer, you can see the peaks are actually higher. And in reality, when you go into the 1 hour view, of course now it's not as high, but during the publish, the virtual CPU units actually reached like 5 or 6. So the peaks here, especially in the 7-day view, are not totally accurate, but just so you have an idea, technically, this would even be possible with a free tier. This is the server that actually processes the video, and we don't want anyone to be able to access that. Therefore, the request from the Next.js backend to the Express backend contains a secure token that I generated with OpenSSL. This is always there in the request as a header that we can make sure on the backend that this request actually comes from our Next.js backend and not from anyone. And once the backend is done processing the animation video, then it's going to store it in an S3 bucket right here. And I've also got that open, and we can see that more than 999 people uploaded something here. And I don't think there's a way to exactly get how much content is in an S3 bucket. It's definitely more than a couple thousand because AWS threw me out of the free tier for this S3 bucket. And I believe it only shows the first 1000 entries right here. And each of these entries is basically marked with a date when it was generated. And if we actually take a look at this, it is the animation video that is coming from our server in this step right here that is processed, then uploaded to S3. And the question now is, how does the client know when the video is done? And for this, we also use our database right here, where we can not only rate limit the amount of requests that people can send to us, but also where we keep the, let's find it, it should be, yeah, right here, a lot of statuses. So we can see all these right here succeeded, all the IDs that we generated. It's basically a joint key of the status, and then the ID the status is for, where all of them have a success status, which is awesome. None of these errored apparently. And do you remember in the very beginning when I said that we have a polling approach in this? If we went to the network tab and we tried exporting this, as soon as the export went through, we start polling an endpoint. And that endpoint also belongs to Next.js. It's hosted on the Next.js backend, so that is serverless. And essentially all it does is it sends a request to the database and checks for the status. So basically the status can be either processing while the video is processing, or the status can also be success, as you just saw. Of course, we need to update that status, and that happens right here from our backend. So once that is done processing, it will update the status to success. And then basically from the Next.js backend in the polling approach you just saw, we always ask every, I believe, 2 seconds, I set it to, hey, what's the status? And once the status actually resolves as success, we should be able to see that right here. Yeah, right here. Perfect. Exactly. Once we get a success status back from Next.js, we also attach the download URL, which is essentially a signed URL that allows the current website visitor to download this file directly from the S3 bucket. We could also mask this using Next.js with custom download links, but I decided not to do it. And once this resolves successfully, the answer comes back from the database as yes, this upload was successful. And then from the backend right here, the URL, let's just get rid of this just for simplicity's sake. The URL of that file is sent to the front end, the S3 bucket URL, and then automatically downloaded on the front end through a library. So the total cost of this is not yet determined because AWS hasn't charged me yet, but I believe it's going to be pretty cheap for the S3 bucket. Then it's, I believe, about 5 cents. Earlier it was 4 cents, now it's 5 cents for the Upstash database, so it's almost negligible. And then it's $20 I paid for the Railway server that actually needs the processing power, or it doesn't really need it apparently, but that would in theory need the processing power for the video processing and encoding, which is pretty CPU intensive. So the entire cost is like $20, a few cents from Upstash, and then a few cents probably from AWS. So man, it's been absolutely crazy going through the S3 bucket and taking a look at like 1 or 2 things that you guys created. It's really funny. You tried breaking the software in the funniest ways possible, and it still held up. Okay, I'm really proud of that. The algorithms kind of work, and I'm really proud of that. So thanks a lot for giving it a try, for all your feedback, and I'm really happy how you guys like the software. And by the way, I'm hiring 1 or 2 developers to help me work on this. I'm gonna post like a job description maybe in the description or something, or DM me on Discord for that. I'm not super set on it yet, but like 1 or 2 experienced developers that are familiar with Express and Next.js would be great, because those are the 2 technologies behind it. DM me on Discord with like a portfolio or whatever. Again, I'm not too set on it yet. But anyways, thanks for watching the video. That's gonna be it for me. I'm gonna see you in the next one. Have a good one, and bye bye.